Okay, so let's talk about doing some SQL code with MySQL. Now, I've loaded the MySQL Workbench, and you'll see right here we have our different connections. So this is the local instance for the MySQL 80, which is the default, 8.0. So that's my default instance. Now, I can add other connections here by clicking on my little plus, and this will allow me to set up connections to other servers. So when I connect to my Workbench, I can have multiple servers here that I can connect to. And then if I want to change settings, that's what this little wrench here is for. So I'm going to open up my local connection and log in using the password I set up when I configured the MySQL server. And here on this side is going to be your schemas. So actually, let me back up because you're probably not going to see that first. What you're going to see is this. So we've got the navigator, and we've got two tabs here, administration and schemas. And under administration, you'll see things related to administering the SQL server. So server status, clients, connections, users, exporting databases, import and restoring database, startup, shutdown instance, look at log files, look at performance information. So all of this is related to managing your SQL server. Schemas, this is your databases. And that's not all of them. There's actually a few more, but these are the major schemas. And so you'll see here different databases. And if you've installed the sample databases, you're going to see the world database, you're going to see the Sakia database, and you'll see the sys database regardless. And then the other two are a couple of other ones I have here. So this shows us our databases. Here is where we're going to enter our SQL code, and then we're going to have output and responses down here. So let's start with this. Let's take a look using our SQL code. I'm going to issue the command show databases, and I'm going to end it with a semicolon. Now, technically, every single command has to end with a semicolon. Technically, it will actually work if you don't end the last one with a semicolon. But if you end another one without a semicolon, then it won't work because that semicolon says, hey, end of this command, start the next one. So this right here will allow me to execute. So I click this to execute, and down here under output, you're going to see the little check mark, hey, this worked, time, show action, A rows returned, and then here you're going to see the ones we have. So database, database, but you're also going to see performance schema and information schema and MySQL. And depending on your version, you may see a few other things. So that's a quick way of showing you your database. Now, if you want to create a new database, we're going to do that using the create database. And what I want to do, by the way, just to give you a heads up of what we're going to do for the rest of the video, we're going to run through a bunch of commands that are just introductory to SQL. We're going to come back and we're going to spend more time later on going through some of these in more detail. So this is like your real quick 10,000-foot overview of SQL. So if I want to create a database, the command is create database. And I want to create a database for pets. Now, let me back up here for a second. And when I get partway through it, you're going to see a couple of things. You're going to see this little X here says this is not a complete command. It doesn't know how to translate it. You're going to see the create turned blue. That's because it recognizes it as a command or a keyword. The DATABA has that little red squiggly underline underneath it. And what that's saying is, yeah, I don't know what this is. I can't interpret it. So I'm going to finish off database. And now you're going to see database is turned blue. It recognizes the word, but there's still that squiggly line. It's because it doesn't recognize what it's supposed to do. So once I type a name for the database, that goes away. My little X over here goes away. That means it now recognizes and can execute this command. So I do an execute. It says create database completed successfully. So let me do a show databases again. And now in addition to what I've seen before, I should see pets. Okay, so that's how we can create and view databases. Now at this point, that is a completely empty database. It has absolutely nothing in it. By the way, I just want to show you one other thing here. I'm going to hit my little refresh, and now pets shows up. And in fact, if I explore open pets and tables, you'll see we really don't have any tables or views or anything else. So I open up one of these others, let's say the sample database, and look at tables. You'll see we've got lots of other database or lots of other tables. So pets doesn't have any. So I want to create a table in the pets database. So I have to start by using a use command. So I'm going to type use pets, wrong thing. That's the table I'm going to create as dogs. Use pets. So that says use this database. So my other subsequent commands are going to be run against this database. And then I want to create a table, and I'm going to name the table dogs. And I'm using open parentheses, and that open parentheses is going to say, hey, here's where we're defining this. So create a table with dogs. Now I'm going to give it the columns and the data types that I want. So that's what my open parentheses is. Now I could just continue running it out along this line if I wanted to. I don't. I actually want to hit enter and tab over, and I want to bring it down just to make this a little bit easier to read. So I'm going to do dog ID. It's going to be an integer value, and it's going to be my primary key. And then comma says that we're doing another column after this. And you'll see that if I erase that comma, then it's primary key and it doesn't know what comes next. So that's where my error is. If I do a comma, then that's where my error is because it's waiting for that subsequent information. So I'm going to do the dog ID. I want to put the dog name, and that's going to be a character value, and it's going to be 20 characters long. Comma says, hey, I'm bringing in another one. And so I want to do breed as a character value, and I'm going to make that 20 characters long as well. And I can change this, by the way. I can do more than. We have other different types of values that we can use. So we've seen integer, we've seen character, we're going to see date here in a minute. But you can find documentation that will give you all of the different types of columns you can create for whichever SQL server that you're running. So I want to include the date of birth, so I'm going to do GOB, that's going to be a date value. And I want the date acquired, so I'm going to call that acquired, and I'm going to give that a date value. Now, I'm not going to put a comma after this one because I don't have a subsequent column coming. So I'm going to close parentheses and then put a semicolon, and this is what I'll have. Use database pets. Within that, create the table docs, and you'll see right here we have all of this grouped under one command because of our opening and closing parentheses. It's going to have dog ID as an integer column that's the primary key, the name, the breed, the date. All right. So I'm going to click execute, and this will tell me down here, use pets, create table. It says both of them succeeded. Let me go ahead and create a new SQL file over here. So here's query one. That's what I was just working on. Here's a new SQL file. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to issue the command show tables and execute it. And it shows me table in pets dogs. Now here's an interesting thing. I didn't tell it which database to use. Well, actually, I kind of did. I did that here when I said use pets. So that will now be the default for every other command I run in this session, even if it's in a different tab. Okay. So here we see that we have a table named dogs in pets. Now, if I wanted to drop the table, when drop is word for delete, so I'm going to do drop table dogs and execute that, and it will say it dropped the table. So now if I do a show tables, I have no tables in my pets database. All right, let's come back over, and this is kind of why I did it, is I didn't want to lose this. So that's how we can create and drop tables. Now, when I created this table, I didn't allow any null characters, so null values. So a null value means it's an empty field. So I did not allow, well, let me rephrase that. I'm getting it backwards. I did allow nulls in anything except the primary key. Primary key can never have a null value. If you do not specify, then any other field or any other column can have a null value. Now, if there's a column that I don't want to have a null value, let's say name, I insist that everything that comes into my database has a name. And when I go to create it, I'll put in this identifier not null. And I don't have to worry about that with my primary key. The primary key just assumes that. So now, this one will not allow null values, but the other three will. So I have to have at least an ID and a name in order to add a record. So I'm going to execute this to recreate my table, and now I have my table recreated. In fact, I can come over here and re-execute my show tables, and sure enough, there we go. Okay, now I want to add some data to this. Now I will tell you adding data here manually can be a very lengthy, time-consuming process, so this is not the best way to do it, but it is a way. If you're scripting a bunch of it, that's one thing, but if you're doing it manually, not a good idea. There are better ways to get data into your database. But we need to know how we can do it so that, let's say we build in our client application, we build a form where people put in data, they run a query that inserts data. All right, that's where we would need to have this type of SQL code. So here's my command. It's going to be insert into, and I want to insert into dogs, and then I'm going to specify specific values. Now, as I do this, I'm going to do valid, so I'm going to do this in order of my columns. So the first one was my dog ID, so I'm going to do dog ID 1. I'm going to say the name is going to be Kona, and notice I'm putting this, do it correctly there, Kona. And I'm doing this in quotation marks to identify that this is a text value. And then this is going to be an Australian Shepherd. And then comes our date value. So the date born. Now I'm going to do this in single quotes, but it's going to be in a specific format. So it's going to be the 4-digit year dash month dash day, and then close that. And then my last one is going to be my date acquired. So same thing, into date of 09-27, and then closing. Now I did not specify which value goes into which column, and because I didn't specify, then it's going to assume that it's going to be in order. So when I execute it, it's going to say insert into 1 rows affected. I'm going to go ahead and add another little tab over here. And we're going to do, and this is a very, very bad way of selecting data, but we're going to do it real quick because we're not in a production database, and that is select asterisk, which says give me everything. So I want to select everything from the dogs table. And when I execute, you'll see down here, here's our dog ID, name, breed, date of birth, and date acquired. Okay, what if I wanted to input something with null values? By the way, you can do multiple rows of values here. Let's say I wanted to put in something with null values. Now, I want to take out my date. I'm going to say I don't know the date, and I don't know the day born or the date acquired. So I'm going to change my primary key to 2. This one is going to be a dog named Red, who's going to be of an unknown breed. Now, if I go to execute this, it will actually fail for me. Let me show you what that looks like. So down here, you see this X, insert dog into dogs, error code column count doesn't match value count at row 1. In other words, we have 5 columns to find, and we've actually only specified 2 or 3. Here's how I can do this. Instead of just assuming that these are going to fall into column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I can specify up here which columns they go into. So I'm going to say the first one is going to be my dog ID. The second one is going to be my name. The third one is going to be breed. I'm just not going to worry about the rest of it. And so that now tells I had 5 columns, I have 3 values I'm putting in, and this tells SQL which columns I want these values to go into. So now when I execute it, it'll work successfully. If I come back over here and look at this again, let me do a select asterisk from dogs, and you'll now see that we have two columns. So here's one, here's two, this one has null values, this one doesn't. Okay, a couple of other things here real quick. I want to show you how to do an update and a delete, and then we're going to drop all of this and we are going to show how to create an ER diagram. And that'll wrap up our summary for our introduction to SQL in MySQL. So I want to do an update. Let me come back over here so I can see this. Let's say this name is wrong. We thought it was an Australian Shepherd. It's actually not. It's a Beagle mix. So I need to fix that. So here's how we're going to do this. It's update. Then we set the table we want to update. I want to update the dogs table. I want to set the breed to, and that's what our equal sign is there, Beagle mix. Now, I need to specify which one. So if I just do this, it'll update all of them. That's not what I want. I need to specify an option. So I want to do this where dog ID equals 1. So look specifically for where dog ID equals 1. I'll back over here so you can see this. When we find dog ID of 1, we're going to update the breed to Beagle mix. So we execute. Yep, works correctly. We come back over here, we rerun this, and you'll see that we've now updated. And that's how we'll update data. Update the table, tell what column we want to set, what we want to set it to, and then the qualifiers, where dog ID equals 1 or whatever. Let's say I want to get rid of number 2. So that's going to be a delete. It's going to be a delete from dogs. And again, the same thing, we need to set a where, which is going to tell which one we want to delete, where dog ID equals 2. And execute. Again, it says it was successful, 1 row is affected. And come over here and rerun my query, and you'll see we're now down to 1. Okay, so there we go. Couple more things here. Let's say we want to find out more about this dogs table. Let's say I didn't design it or I forgot what was in it. I can use this command, describe dogs, and execute. And that's going to tell me my fields or my columns, my type, whether nulls are allowed, and if something's a primary key or not, and then if I have any default values set. So that describe is going to tell me all about the tables. All right, so if this was not a table that I put, or not a database that I put together, that describe actually becomes really, really useful. Now, there's one other thing that is kind of useful, and that is an ER diagram. Before we get that, I'm just going to drop this real quick because I don't need it. So I'm going to type drop, and get that out of the way so we can see it, database pets. So drop table will drop a table, drop database drops an entire database. So now if I do show databases, we no longer have a pets database. Okay, one other thing I want to show you that's really helpful, and this is if you are working with a database that you did not create. We have something called an ER diagram that we can create. It's an entity relationship diagram. And here's how we'll do it. Let's say we want to explore this. I'll also explore the world database for the fun of it. I'm going to go to database, reverse engineer. I'm going to select, so here's what I'm going to connect to, my database, and I'll select which server, how I'm going to connect. It's going to ask me to log in. Click next, and then I'm going to select what I want, and I want the world database here. Actually, you know what? Let me do the Sakia database. It's a little bit bigger. You'll see how this is a little more helpful. So I'm going to click next. It's going to go through, read a bunch of stuff, and then it's going to ask, well, what do we want to see? In this case, I just want to see the table objects. I don't want to see the views, the runtimes, or the triggers. So I'm going to unselect all of those. Just show me my tables, and click execute. And so this creates a database diagram for me. And here I'll be able to see, so this is my overall map, right? That's kind of helpful. But this will show me, so this is a table name, address. Here are all of the columns or fields in it. And you're going to see your primary keys are identified. You're going to see what these are. So address ID is a small integer. Address is a variable character of 50. And then here you're going to see relationships. So my address table through this relationship right here is related to my store table. So, and you'll see right here I have an address ID right here. And then down here you're going to see under store I have an address ID. And so this field right here is what creates this relationship up to here. And you'll see as I hover over that, you'll see that both of those are identified. So any of these that I hover over, it will show you that relationship, that relational connection. Okay, and then when you're done with it, we just close it down. That's a great way to learn about, don't want to say that, that is a great way to learn about a database that either A, you created, but it was a while back and you don't remember all the details and you didn't document it well, or B, a database that you're taking over, that you're managing and you're working with, but that you didn't create, you can't find documentation on it, and you need to start building it. Okay, there we go. A quick introduction to SQL with MySQL. Now, in subsequent sessions, we're going to go through and we're going to describe some of these commands a little bit more. We're going to get a lot more practice, a lot more experience with them. But this right now should give you, hopefully, a real quick 10,000-foot overview of working with a MySQL database using the SQL language.